So finally, a few of the stories of real heresy and creativity. The one that seems to be the favorite of a lot of people that read my stuff and the talks I give is about UPS. How many people know this story? UPS does not take left turns. A few of the people. Okay, for the people who don't know, why would you stop taking left turns in a city? Well, you're waiting at a traffic light, you're waiting to turn, you're idling to cross traffic. You're idling and wasting time, energy, and money. So they redesigned their routes using GPS software to basically go in right concentric circles to the right, and they're saving 28 million miles and 3 million gallons. Now, this is a good eco-efficiency story, but this is actually, to me, about culture and about heresy. Because I want you to imagine that first meeting where someone said, hey, why don't we stop taking left turns? Who's with me? I don't know if that person's there anymore, but it's, you know, there's a culture that allows that kind of question and allows you to go, well, let's take a look at it. Maybe it's not so wacky after all. Maybe it's very wise. Another quick example of leapfrog kind of innovation is a story, and I'm not sure why this hasn't been rolled out more broadly, but HP did a laptop a couple years ago where now I want you to look at this. This is all the supplies that came with the laptop, and this is like a canvas traveling bag that it comes in, and this is all part of the product, and the only packaging in this is the box that was sent to Walmart. This reduced packaging 97%. Not 10 or 20%, 97. Because you know, you buy a laptop, usually you know you've got like crafted styrofoam for every single piece. They said, well, why can't we just ship it in its own bag? So someone said, why do we even need packaging? Let's find another way to make it part of the product. This is the kind of innovation we're going to need. And my favorite story that's, you know, not as sexy to some people, but I find really interesting, and it's the longest story in the book, so I'll just mention it quickly, is about a floor cleaning machine made by a company called Tennant. They're a 150-year-old company in Minneapolis. They make machines that you see janitors pushing around. These machines have worked the same way for decades. You put a box of chemicals, legally hazardous chemicals, in the machine. The chemicals and water hit the floor, scrub, pick it up. Well, they developed a machine that ionizes water and uses just tap water. You don't need any chemicals. It's not going to clean a crime scene, but like everyday cleaning, it works just fine. It's the fastest growing product in their history. The only problem they had is they launched it sort of going into the recession, and people don't quite believe it. They're like, well, that can't work. We have to have chemicals. But it is still the fastest growing product, and they've shaken up that entire industry. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then finally, there's entire business model innovation going on. And there's a couple companies I highlight in particular in a lot of the writing I do and the work. Waste management is one. They're in a massive transition away from hauling waste away to actually helping you manage waste. And Xerox. Now, this is a map that Xerox did for one of their customers of the floor plan of an office building. Each one of those boxes is a printer. Everybody's got a printer. But they realized that customers were going to start finding that wasteful and energy intensive and paper intensive. So they said, well, let's map it out differently. Let's go to this many boxes, a third or so. Multifunction devices, centrally located. People get it out of their office. They'll have to get up and get it. And you'll reduce paper use because people won't print stuff they don't really need. They did this for Dow Chemical. And Dow is saving $20 to $30 million in paper and energy over the next few years. Now, that's a great story for Dow, but to me, again, this is about business model innovation and what Xerox is doing. Because what they're saying, fundamentally, is, will you please use less of our product? Do less printing. Use less paper. That's against everything they've been about. And so I asked Ursula Burns, the CEO, I said, doesn't this cannibalize your business? And she said, well, yes, it does, but it's better if we do it than somebody else. And that's the bottom line. That's disruptive innovation that's been around since Clayton Christensen and the internet era. But this is something a little bit different because this is a fundamental challenge to sort of our capitalistic model. But more and more sectors are doing this. They're sitting down with their customers, usually business customers first, but it's starting to happen at the consumer level, to say, we're going to help you reduce your footprint. You're going to use less, but you're going to buy from us. And this is the new model. So, you know, what do I mean by heresy? 15 years ago, television and advertising executives did not ask, what if people stop watching commercials? What do we do? That's changed the industry entirely, TiVo and other DVRs. You've got, you know, you've got Apple now, but Sony and Amazon before them saying, does a book need to be a book? And I know publishers in the room are scared about this. I'm, as a writer, worried about this. What does this mean? Are we going to be producing books in the same way? This is changing this industry. There was an article in the Times recently that was about innovation. They didn't call it heretical innovation, but I found it very similar. They were talking about the question that somebody started asking in the 60s that said, why do I have to go to a teller to get cash? Why do I have to talk to someone to get cash out of my account? And so the ATM was born. And they use that as an example to say, well, there's another startup that's asking some interesting questions, which is this thing Square. Has anybody seen this? Little device you put in your iPhone. I have one with me. so I can sell you anything. It allows you to take a credit card as an individual. The question they asked is, why can't a person take a credit card? It's one of those questions that in a few years we won't believe that no one had asked before. It seems so obvious now. So now if someone owes you money, you just say, okay, give me your credit card. I'll just swipe it. So this is where we're headed. So the other questions that people need to start asking are going to be sort of forcing functions. What if there's no water in one of our facilities or in the country? That's Lake Mead. No one, I think, believes Lake Mead is coming back to where it was. What if oil's $500 a barrel? Now, I started asking that question in this book and in my talks when it was back down to 35. So this was crazy. What are we now? 120, right? This does not seem so nuts anymore. And I think we need to ask this as an industry, as a country, and say, what if it happens? What does that do to our business, to our suppliers, to our customers, and what does that mean for how we do business? So the companies that ask and answer these kinds of heretical questions will create the most value and will dominate their markets. This is the cleaning machine from Tennant in Minneapolis. So the question they asked was, can we clean the floor without chemicals? And there's a sort of cultural backstory to how they started asking those different questions, which is interesting. But that's the question they asked. And then you've got airlines. Boeing and a bunch of airlines doing test flights, and the Navy doing test flights using algae and other biofuels. The question they're asking is, can we fly without fossil fuels? And the answer is yes, we can. The engines work. We don't have enough supply yet, but this is a question we need answered. Because if we get to 500 a barrel or something like that, no one's going to be able to fly anywhere unless we find different supplies. And this is going on in sector after sector. And then finally, putting aside whether a Prius can stop and needs any recalls, putting aside the safety issues, which has really muddied the story, the Toyota Prius is the most successful eco product of all time. It's what drove Toyota to #1. It became the innovation leader. And by the way, I just heard on the radio in the car on the way here today that because of gas prices, the Prius sales were up 70% last month. So we're back to 2008 again, where all of a sudden this is going to be a top 10 car again. But this is what drove Toyota to #1. And the reason we're moving to electric cars, I think at a pretty fast pace, is because this product was so successful. It did so well. But the question they asked was different. Starting in '93, 18 years ago, they said, does a car need a combustion engine? What's an environmental car? The answer was, well, we don't need an engine totally halfway. I mean, they came up with the hybrid answer, but we're moving away from the combustion engine because of this car. So what's your heresy? I mean, that's the bottom line. Think about your business, your sector, and what the question needs to be. How do we fundamentally change what we do? So finally, I use this as sort of an end quote. People have seen this in social movements. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? And it's a really powerful idea. And so I wanted to find out where this came from, because I'd seen it for a while. And so I did some really deep research. I Googled it. And I found out that in about 7.3 seconds that it's 2,000 years old, part of this. It was from a rabbinical scholar at the time of Jesus. So it's been around almost as long as our society, this idea that we have a role to play. And so I always leave people with this idea of let's together, and you're here today, so you're clearly part of this, but let's go back to our organizations and let's ask people to be part of this movement to build healthier, more sustainable, more profitable companies, communities, and country.